Of now. Dr. Marry and I have made a decision together to share the most personal part of our nearly 20-year relationship in the hopes that it might offer assistance to others who have struggled or are currently struggling with this issue. We share this knowing that we are putting ourselves out there, particularly Dr. Marry, for criticism, but we feel that the benefits it might bring to someone else far outweigh whatever judgment could be lobbied at us. To the few of you who have known of this, thank you for your incredible friendship and support. To those who haven't, but who have wondered how I seemed to hit the absolute jackpot in terms of spouse, we share this to remind everyone that we all only know a fraction of anybody's reality. It behooves us all to be kind whenever possible. This is a multi-post, multimedia series, and we invite you to share them with anyone in your life who you think could benefit from our journey. And if you are struggling with any piece of this, please know that we're here for you in any way that we can be. Our story is not your story, but we hope it might provide something for you to hold on to as you traverse your own path to happiness. This morning, like so many from what is now my reality, Dr. Marry came to the door of our bedroom and said sweetly, "Dee Dee, time to get up and ready for spin." I nestled into my warm flannel pillow for one more second before recalling a scene very much and absolutely nothing like this from exactly 3 years ago, in the middle of this night. I took a moment to catch my breath, to thank my lucky stars, and to dwell in the warm light of gratitude that I have had nearly every single day since the early morning hours of February 1st, 2017. 2:45 a.m., February 1st, 2017. I was sleeping soundly when Mazz called out brusquely from the hallway outside our bedroom door. "Dee, get up. I need you to take me to the emergency room. Something is really wrong with me." I took a moment to let my irritation wash over me again. I was warm and exhausted and not feeling particularly cordial towards this man, and I didn't appreciate his insistence that I get up right now. I stumbled into the bathroom, which can only be described as looking like the set of a war film. Blood was everywhere. I shook my head to clear the sleep away and looked again. Then I turned to look at Mazz, who was holding a bloody rag to his nose, sucking up gobs of blood and trying unsuccessfully to mop it off of his face. I was awake. Earlier that day, Mazz texted me in the afternoon saying that he was going home because he couldn't get his nose to stop bleeding. I shook my head in disgust, literal and emotional. Years earlier, I had started calling Mazz a semi-hemophiliac, which he consistently reminded me was not possible. He had serious nosebleeds all the time, particularly when the dry winter air settled in. If you lightly flicked his arm, he would bruise up and down it. He also had some obsessive scratching issue that made his legs and arms bleed and made our bedding appear to have had a point-blank shooting happen on them. I didn't even respond to the text because I irritatedly thought, "Of course you do," and moved on with my day. I made supper that night, and while we ate, he held a soggy, bloody handkerchief to his nose and kept sniffling up the blood that was steadily streaming from him. Revolted by both this action and, quite frankly, nearly everything about him by now, I ate in silence and got up from the table as quickly as possible. We spent another night like we had spent so many, Mazz in the basement watching anything on television, and me somewhere else reading whatever book I was devouring. Finally, I went to bed alone and, as usual, fell asleep into a deep sleep. Earlier in our lives, I remember Mazz telling me when we first met that he had one whiskey a night. That was certainly more alcohol than I drank, but for an Irishman, it didn't feel too bad, whatever that means. So I reluctantly set that aside. As our marriage ticked along, the drinking started to get more persistent and consistent, but it was gradual, so I can't say there was a clear turning point. And along with that came other issues. We would be in the basement together to watch a movie, one of the few things he was ever interested in doing, and he would be asleep before the opening credits were over. In the later years, I often joked that I had a newborn for a husband. Sleep for 20 minutes, up for 15. Sleep for 1 hour, up for 25, and on and on. He never saw a full movie with me. Early on, he very occasionally slept in the basement, claiming to have just fallen asleep while working. I didn't doubt him, and I don't really think he was lying. He was working towards becoming a tenured professor by this point, and his work was demanding. But as time progressed, he ended up doing this more and more. I would wake up in the middle of the night and go downstairs to find him sitting up, sleeping heavily, a glass of whiskey always by his side, sometimes in his hand. Waking him up was like waking the dead, and I was consistently outraged by the time I actually got him to go upstairs, because by then I was fully awake. When he did come to bed, he emanated such a bad smell and snored so loudly that I could hardly sleep. When we traveled, our first stop was always to a liquor store so he could purchase his travel bottle of whiskey. He also stopped wanting to do anything. To get him to agree to go on a bike ride on the most beautiful of summer days, I had to suggest that we bike to a restaurant or bar where we could get a drink. He was completely disengaged from Quinn. Quinn seemed grateful for the disengagement, or at the very least, he seemed to have little interest in the man who had been so important to him for so many of his growing up years. Morning pick-me-up. One morning, sometime in early 2016, I left for work and had to run home a few minutes later because I had forgotten something. Mazz clearly didn't hear me come in because he was standing in the kitchen, looking out the window with a glass of whiskey in his hand. It was about 8:30. We had had hundreds of discussions and fights about his drinking. I tried to get him to see that something was desperately wrong by cajoling, pleading, using logic, begging, weeping, screaming, and threatening to leave. But nothing changed him. Because I grew up in a household where absolutely no alcohol was consumed ever, the first beer I remember seeing was at my cousin's wedding when I was 13 years old. Whenever I raised my concerns, Mazz immediately dismissed me, or called me crazy, or told me that I was right and that he needed to slow down. He started lying to me all the time. I would come down to the basement in the morning and there would be a glass of whiskey with an ice cube in it, often shoved into the corner of the couch. And when I would question him, he would say it was from last night. Now, it's not very warm in our basement, but it doesn't keep ice from melting. No way out. Many times I plotted an exit strategy, but that's easier said than done. I didn't know how to unravel the life we had made together. The house we co-owned, the dog we shared, the expense and the income, the boy who wasn't technically his, but whom he had played such an active role in raising. And this is a really important point, I still loved him. And more importantly, I believed wholeheartedly that I could somehow save him if I could just find the right key to unlock whatever this new version of him was. I couldn't let go of the man I had met and fallen in love with, and I couldn't give up on him or us. And I learned all of this later. Mazz was an excellent and textbook alcoholic. He could explain away whatever I caught him doing. He was fed up by so much of his life that this was just the way he was coping. He would so expertly move the blame from him to me that it often left me wondering what my initial accusation of him had been. He was never, ever physically violent, but he could turn on me, using his considerable intelligence and knowledge of my vulnerabilities to protect his own agenda with a wicked comment that left me breathless time and again. A Sunday evening in early winter 2016, we were watching an episode of Father Brown on PBS. As a side note, that show's boring. And I had fallen asleep on the couch.
Yes, it is.
Around 9:30, I woke up to the sound of a strangled, almost inhuman yell. I sat up in time to see Mazz's entire body sitting in a chair to my left, stiff as a board, his eyes rolled back up into his head. His legs were extended in front of him, and I quickly got up to move his computer desk away and gently help him to the floor. He was having a massive seizure, something I had never seen anyone do before. I was very calm, and most frighteningly, so was our dog, Lily. Never one to let any excitement go on without her exuberant barking, she came and laid down quietly by his head. And that's when I thought, oh my God, he's going to die. But he didn't die. He had a whole battery of tests conducted, but they found no reason for the seizure. He couldn't drive for 6 months, so I dropped him off and picked him up from school every day. And after that, for quite a while, he improved. He was grateful to be alive and worked to be more engaged, but that didn't last forever. Amazingly, nobody at that time, not the ER doctors, not the neurologists we spent time with a few weeks later, ever questioned his alcohol consumption, so I didn't correlate the two together, and he certainly didn't stop drinking. 9 a.m. February 1st, 2017. We had been in the emergency room for hours. The nurse had cauterized his nose to stop the bleeding, and he was getting fluids. The doctors were asking all kinds of questions and initially told me that despite his white blood count looking good, they thought he might have leukemia. They admitted him to the hospital with the intention of doing a bone marrow test and spinal tap to find out more. In all of this, incredulously, I never thought Mazz was an actual alcoholic. I didn't have the vocabulary to define it that way, since I had such a limited understanding of what that disease actually looks like. He had kept his job, he wasn't crashing his car or getting DUIs. Things were bad in nearly every aspect of his life. He had failed relationships with most of his work colleagues. He had lost interest in doing much of anything, and he was basically a grumpy lump of a human being. I was managing everything at home and only engaging him if I dangled alcohol as a reward for an activity. But I still didn't understand the disease that was consuming my husband and literally ruining our lives. And I had no idea the remarkable journey this particular nosebleed had started us on that dark, cold February morning.
You all right, Turner?
Yep. Is that hard to hear?
No, because it's the truth. That's what happened. I mean, it's not, you didn't make it up, and it's not, that is what we were going through. Well, you
were part of it.
You were going through.
We
anyway.
were there, kind of.
Yeah. I think
it's actually, I mean, I like the two meetings, the two AA meetings I go to every week. You have to hear it. You have to hear other people's stories. This, I hope, is going to help people go, yep, that's what's going on with us. We're not alone.
Would it have helped you?
Oh, I absolutely think I did, but that's the trouble. You don't. You tried. And I've said it to people who've asked, how can I help this person? I said, you can't until they want help. I didn't. Well, we'll get to that in these blogs, but it was that even before that miraculous day where everything turned around, I still was convinced I knew how to fix it myself, and if everyone left me alone, I could work out how to do it. And that's the trouble. That's what this disease does.
I wonder.
You will never listen, and if you don't want to.
I wonder, and this is a ridiculous thing to wonder out loud, but I'm going to because it's my blog. I wonder if alcohol is harder, or addiction is harder for really smart people because they're so used to problem solving and being in charge, and they can rationalize things differently. I'm not saying stupid people are stupid.
No, and actually, I know what you mean.
I'm not saying that not super smart people are stupid. That's what I wanted to say.
I think I know what you mean, because if you look into it, and especially from when you get sober and want to stay sober and you hear stories, there has to be an awful lot of functioning alcoholics around.
Yeah.
And if they don't get pulled over or get a DUI, they don't cause an accident. You don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm super proud of you for being here.
Well, God,
I'm super happy.
This isn't easy
I'm
for you.
super happy for us that you're here.
Well,
You're my person.
Ow! I like my ear too. They still don't bend.
I know. All right.